You know this piece. Even if you think you don't, you do. Rachmaninoff's Second Piano Concerto has hundreds of millions of streams. It's performed more than any other piano concerto in the world. There are more technically impressive concertos, more structurally innovative ones, but this is the one that wins the audience. So what is it about this piece? Here's the part that gets me. Before any of that, before the streaming numbers, global fame, before the whole world fell in love with this concerto, there was a 23-year-old in Moscow who was so destroyed by a single bad night that he literally couldn't compose for 3 years. Nothing. The piano just sat there. So what changed? Part of it involved a hypnotherapist. We'll get to that. But the deeper story starts earlier with Tchaikovsky, who saw something in Rachmaninoff that Rachmaninoff didn't yet see in himself. This is the story of how the most popular piano concerto ever almost didn't exist. To understand what went wrong, you need to first understand what went right. By his early 20s, Sergei Rachmaninoff was the golden boy of Russian music. He'd enrolled at the Moscow Conservatory as a kid, studied piano under his cousin Alexander Salati, who himself had studied with Liszt, studied counterpoint with Taneyev, one of Russia's greatest teachers. All of this happened because Tchaikovsky noticed him. Tchaikovsky heard the 16-year-old Rachmaninoff play and said, "For him, I predict a great future." That wasn't casual praise. Tchaikovsky commissioned the teenager to arrange Sleeping Beauty for piano 4 hands. He wasn't thrilled with the results, calling it lacking in courage and creativity. But he kept championing Rachmaninoff anyway. When Rachmaninoff composed his one-act opera Aleko as a graduation piece, Tchaikovsky personally recommended it for the Bolshoi. He even wanted to pair it with his own opera, Iolanta, as a double bill. In a letter to Rachmaninoff, Tchaikovsky all but formally welcomed him into the big leagues. "You see, Sergei, we're famous composers now." But that double bill never happened, because on October 25th, 1893, Tchaikovsky died. Rachmaninoff's response tells you everything. He immediately composed a 45-minute piano trio in Tchaikovsky's memory, the trio Elegiac No. 2, a massive outpouring of grief for the man who believed in him before anyone else. Even so, at this point, Rachmaninoff had every reason to be confident. Gold medal from the conservatory, Tchaikovsky's blessing, a growing reputation. He just didn't know what was coming. March 1897, St. Petersburg. Rachmaninoff's first symphony is about to premiere. He was 23, 2 years of work. This was supposed to be his arrival. It was a disaster. The conductor was Alexander Glazunov, a respected composer in his own right. But that night, something was wrong. Rachmaninoff believed Glazunov was drunk on the podium. Either way, what came out that night was a mess. Rachmaninoff didn't even stay in the hall. He listened from backstage and then left before the piece finished. And then came the reviews. The critic César Cui wrote, "If there was a conservatoire in hell, if one of its talented students were instructed to write a program symphony on the 7 plagues of Egypt, and if he were to compose a symphony like Mr. Rachmaninoff's, then he would have fulfilled his task brilliantly and delighted the inmates of hell." Read that again. That's not a criticism, that's murder. So after reading that, I had to give it a listen myself. Look, it's not the most compelling symphony ever, but The Seven Plagues of Egypt is a bit much. It has some nice moments. But it would definitely need to be rehearsed. So I'm guessing that Glazunov and the orchestra just phoned it in, drunk or not, and Cui blamed the composer. The timing couldn't have been worse. It landed on a 23-year-old who just lost his mentor. And not just any mentor, friggin' Tchaikovsky. For 3 years, he wrote almost nothing. As far as he was concerned, his career was over. He wasn't completely idle during those years. He pivoted to conducting, gave piano lessons to pay the rent. But when it came to composition, nothing. He'd moved on, settled for less. His family wasn't having it, though. They arranged for him to meet with Leo Tolstoy, thinking that maybe Russia's greatest living writer could shake something loose. It didn't go well. After Rachmaninoff played Tolstoy a song he'd written, the 71-year-old asked, "Tell me, is such music necessary to anyone?" Ouch. When you're already worried you're a fraud, the guy who wrote War and Peace questioning the value of what you do isn't exactly the confidence boost you need. He later wrote of the experience, "He made me feel like I was an utter non-entity. His opinion was a verdict." Then in January 1900, his family tried something different. They introduced him to Dr. Nikolai Dahl. Now, Dahl wasn't some quack. He was a neurologist who'd studied hypnotherapy in France. And crucially, he was a musician himself, meaning he knew what it felt like to fail at music. Every single day for months, Rachmaninoff visited Dahl's apartment, and the sessions were part hypnosis, part conversation. And while Rachmaninoff sat in a deep armchair, half asleep, Dahl repeated the same words over and over. "You will begin to write your concerto. You will work with great facility. The concerto will be of an excellent quality." It sounds crazy, but it worked! At first, nothing. Then slowly, fragments, a melody here, a chord progression there. And then by the summer, Rachmaninoff said that new ideas began to stir within me, far more than I needed for my concerto. The dam had broken. June 1900. Rachmaninoff's friend, the great bass Fyodor Chaliapin, invited him to Italy while he prepared for a production at La Scala. And there, away from Moscow, away from the scene of his failure, Rachmaninoff started writing again. He began with the second and third movements, not the first. Listen to that melody. That long, caramely line that just enrobes you. Rachmaninoff wrote in a language everyone understands. The first movement was finished by spring 1901. On November 9th, the complete Piano Concerto No. 2 in C minor premiered. It was a triumph. Even César Cui, that César Cui, expressed admiration, and Rachmaninoff dedicated it to Dr. Dahl. So why is this still the most popular piano concerto ever written? There's a difference between trying to be sincere and just being sincere. And I think Rachmaninoff was that kind of composer. His models were Tchaikovsky, Rimsky-Korsakov, the Romantic Russians, who believed music's job is to bring the feelings. And he took that language and made it his own. No posturing, no intellectual scaffolding, no cynicism. And in 1901, when the rest of Europe was busy deconstructing everything, that kind of directness was starting to look like an act of defiance. While Rachmaninoff was pouring his heart into this concerto, the rest of European music was moving in exactly the opposite direction. Debussy was being impressionistic in Paris. Schoenberg was about to abandon tonality in Vienna. Stravinsky would soon cause a literal riot with The Rite of Spring. The entire musical establishment was sprinting toward the future, and Rachmaninoff, he looked at all of it and said, no thanks. He was openly, stubbornly conservative, thought atonality was a dead end. And the European avant-garde returned the favor. They dismissed him as sentimental, old-fashioned, a relic who refused to evolve. But here's what's fascinating. While the European modernists were sneering at Rachmaninoff, audiences in London and New York were losing their collective minds over him. The British and the Americans went wild for this concerto, more so than the Europeans, more so even than the Russians. And I think that's the key to understanding why it's still at the top over 100 years later. Timing is everything. When Rachmaninoff toured London and New York, Strauss's Salome was banned across the English-speaking world. Too shocking, crass. While they stiff-armed the new and controversial incoming from Europe, Rachmaninoff offered something different. That inimitable Russian flavor, the melancholy, the sweep, the storytelling. But it wasn't Brahms. It wasn't Tchaikovsky 2.0 either. And crucially, it wasn't asking you to abandon everything you knew about music. It was just delicious. Most of this 1905 to 1914 series is about the changemakers, but I had to include Rachmaninoff because his US and UK premieres in 1908 and 1909 turned him into a rock star. There's merch too. See you in the next one.